Hello, Janeites, and welcome to Austen Chat, a podcast coming to you from the Jane Austen Society of North America. I'm your host, Brecken Wood, from the Georgia region of JASNA. Today with me, I have Susan Allen Ford, who has been the editor of JASNA's journals Persuasions and Persuasions On-Line for almost 20 years. She is also professor of English Emerita at Delta State University, and her book, What Jane Austen's Characters Read and Why, is being published by Bloomsbury later this year. A fellow bookworm, Susan is here to talk with us about the rich reading lives of Austen's characters and of Austen herself. Welcome to the show, Susan.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here talking about Jane Austen and books.
Yeah, me too.
It's interesting when you said what Jane Austen's characters read and why. I was a little startled because I always think of it as what Jane Austen's characters read and why. I realized, even as I made up that title, that
there's no way to know.
There's no way to know, but I think of them as continually reading in the present tense.
That's true. So. And as an English professor, we're supposed to talk about characters in the present tense. Okay, well, that I will know for in the future what Jane Austen's characters read and why.
But it's certainly not a prescribed pronunciation for that. So it's an interesting little tension here.
Things are getting linguistically interesting already. I'm excited. I'm also an editor. I don't know if all of our listeners know that. And so I love talking to Susan about these kinds of nitpicky, nitty-gritty linguistic things. So Susan, I am interested to hear your answer to our Desert Island segment because you've spent a lot of time in the minds of Austen's characters while researching and writing your book. So if you were stranded on a desert island and can have only one Austen character as your pen pal, who would you choose and why?
Well, I had a hard time with this question because I don't know how I would respond on a desert island. You know, what is it what I would want? If, what do I miss most on the island? Talking about books or reading about people? Mm-hmm. And watching people socialize. So I think if I were most missing books and the world of books on a desert island, and that would depend on, my circumstances, I would want to write to either Fanny Price or Anne Elliot because they both read widely and they're very thoughtful about what they read. And, I think those would be interesting, but maybe earnest letters. Well, if I wanted to have a connection to society and to kind of link to all those people that I'm missing, I think Elizabeth Bennet would be the great correspondent because she's an entertaining social observer, but especially by the end of the novel, she has an ability to rethink her perspectives on things and to examine herself. So I think she would be a wonderful correspondent.
Elizabeth Bennet is a popular choice. I will say you're the first one to mention Fanny, which is good because I like her and I think she deserves a little more credit than she normally gets. And we're going to get into her later because Fanny is one of Austen's great readers. Okay, Susan, let's talk about books. I love your topic. Okay. Books about books are my favorite kinds of books. So is it true that you first heard about Jane Austen from a Newbery book when you were 12 years old?
Yes, it is. For Christmas, I think in like 1968 or 9, I can't remember the year, my mother gave me Irene Hunt's coming-of-age novel, Up a Road Slowly, which had won the Newbery Award for that year. And it's about this girl whose mother dies and she is sent to live with her maiden aunt who's a school teacher. And it in a lot of ways a kind of conventional coming of age book, but one of the things characters, the good characters have in common is a love of reading. And during that book, Jane Austen gets mentioned a couple of times, and specifically Pride and Prejudice. Mm-hmm. Well, I really loved this novel. I've read it a bunch of times over the years and even recently. And what happened when I after I read it the first or second time was it sent me to the public library because the character Julie had mentioned Jane Austen and Pride and Prejudice. And I thought, well, I like this character. I want to see what books she likes. So that was, I found the Jane Austen books, and here we are today.
That's so sweet. And one of the books that I loved as a child was, and I think many people of course love, is Matilda by Roald Dahl. And in that one, she goes to the public library as a child and is reading so many books. And that book made me want to read Charles Dickens, because I think that was a favorite of
Oh.
he's a favorite author of Roald Dahl, and he mentions him in several of his different books. That's such a sweet introduction to Jane Austen. So, where did you get the idea to write your current book? Was that memory kind of in the back of your mind, and you wanted to explore Austen's characters and their reading lives?
Not immediately, but I've always kind of been interested in this. Throughout my reading, I just get kind of interested when people would mention specific titles while they were writing a book about something else that would somehow, to me anyway, add to the reality of that world, because here we are sharing something.
Mm-hmm.
So I think in probably the mid to late 90s, I was trying to figure out what to write about for the JASNA AGM on Emma in Colorado Springs. So that's a long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I started thinking about Emma's reading lists, and how she's made up all these reading lists apparently, and I'm wondering what would be on those. And I was thinking about what gets mentioned, and so for that conference I read, among other things, Adelaide and Theatre by Madame de Genlis. And once I did that, it was fascinating enough to discover all these linkages that I had no idea of, that I thought, well, this is really interesting. And if Emma has read this book, then she should really know a lot and see a lot of connections that she doesn't seem to be recognizing. And now, as a reader of Emma, I'm really thinking more about, and more critically about what Emma knows and doesn't know, as well as
Mm-hmm.
what the other characters are seeing. So that's kind of where it began.
So this book has been a long time coming. If the first seeds were planted in the 90s, you've been ruminating on it for a long time.
Yeah, that's true. I was fortunate enough to have a fellowship at Chawton House Library in 2009, but I had to leave early, and then they were kind enough to let me come back. So I got quite a lot done around that time, and what a wonderful place to write that and research that was. Um, but then, but then there was a lot of family illness during the teens, and so I had to kind of put this down for a while. But during COVID, I started back up.
Mm-hmm. That was the time when a lot of projects were born and created.
We're rebooted anyway, in my case.
So tell us a bit about the research process for the book. I imagine that creating the list of books that Austen characters read would be just a matter of going through the novels and seeing which ones she had mentioned. But once you had that list, what did you do with it? What did you want your readers to learn from the literary lives of Austen's characters?
Yeah, well, my first stage after the list was just to read the books on the list, but also read around about the books on the list, because I was also kind of interested in what people, what other readers during Austen's life would have thought about these same books that she was reading.
Mm-hmm.
So what was, I don't know if I can say a general opinion, but a general and or critical opinion of these books. So I would look at reviews if they existed. I would try to find out how many editions books had gone through. Are there parodies of these books? I mean, just kind of looking around to see what the world around these particular books she's mentioning, or these texts that she's mentioning, might be. I had a couple of things in mind here. Um, Partly, as I think I've already suggested, I think this habit of reading is something that we share with Austen's characters. Once I read Madame de Genlis's Adelaide and Theodore, I had a link to Emma that gave me a particular insight into her character, but also into maybe the plot of the novel. So, to some degree, I'm seeing more what she sees or could be seeing. I'm just kind of fascinated by the issues, not just of what they're reading and why, but why these specific texts that Jane Austen has specified. And of course, sometimes it's books that they don't read, like Fordyce's sermons. They get through about 3 minutes.
Right.
And then what happens then, that's interesting. But also what happens next that they don't get to hear. What implications might that have for the novel?
Fordyce's sermon is probably one of the ones that comes to people's minds first, because it's also mentioned in the adaptations as well. We know that that's the one that Mr. Collins tries to lecture the young ladies on. And I think I originally, because it says sermons in the title, I used to think, oh, it's just a religious text, and so it's kind of like they're sitting in Sunday school. But isn't it actually, it's like a behavior or etiquette guide for young ladies? Is that what it is?
Yeah. Behavior, education, morality, that sort of thing. He also does he made his name as a preacher, but he also wrote a follow-up book, Addresses to Young Men. And he says in the intro to that, well, young men don't want to be don't want to sit through sermons, or they don't want to be preached to. I mean, it's interesting because he's always trying to make a connection to them. He says, "Think of me as a brother,"
Well, and that's why Austen is such a good moral teacher, I think, because she is almost never preachy. She's so good at illustrating important moral ideas and values in a way that we can relate to without any like finger wagging or droning on and on like Mr. Collins. Let's talk about some of Austen's biggest readers. Can you talk about a couple of her standout readers?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think Marianne is an interesting one, but I would put Eleanor with Marianne because, it seems to me that a lot of the reading that goes on in Norland and then in Barton Cottage is going on out loud. They're talking about the poetry that they're reading in the evening, or how when Willoughby was here, they're reading Hamlet aloud. It seems like reading is a real family event, and that is, I think, typical of the period, and especially of Austen's circle, where they spend a lot of time in groups reading to each other, maybe while some of them are working or some of them are doing other things. You can even see that in Austen's letters. So, yeah, those two, in Sense and Sensibility, I'll add their mother and Margaret in there, are reading a lot. And what we don't hear about is the novels that they're reading in that book. I think that's an interesting absence. But I get the sense that they are novel readers too, because, I mean, Eleanor has this idea that she understands Edward's situation, that she says something like, oh, yeah, or thinks it's the traditional kind of tension between parent and child, and if we could just take care of the mother somehow, things will be okay. She completely misunderstands that, but she reads it through her fictional, a sort of fictional filter. go on to Fanny. Yes, Fanny is amazing. I mean, as you suggested, not just romantic poetry, though she is reading a lot, but also lots of travels. I mean, like McCartney's Embassy to China. She's reading drama. You know, she's reading a lot of different things. Crabbe's poetry is sitting there on her desk, as well as Johnson's essays. And certainly Anne Elliot reads a lot. And I mean, we get that sense she's walking in the vicinity of Winthrop, thinking about all the zillions of poems she's read about autumn, you know, and then she gets to Lyme and talks to Benwick about Byron and Scott. And then when she's in Bath, she's thinking about Frances Burney's Cecilia and Henry Pryor's Henry and Emma, or the Nut Brown Maid, the Arabian Nights. I mean, she's just got this wide span of reading as well, that we don't have, you know, complete access to, but is really fascinating. And I think maybe William Dereshevitz made this point first. Fanny and Anne both are very up to date readers. Whereas, you know, somebody like the Crawfords, um, they're quoting stuff from when they do from way back, and you get a sense that it might be in some, you know, volume 2 collection of poems that they've just kind of happened across on the Admiral's table, you know, or maybe elegant extracts or something like that.
Right.
There's a lot of elegant extracts going on in these novels.
Or maybe
from some of the
like they haven't read anything since school, and so they were really just reading what was assigned, and then they haven't read anything since then.
Yeah, that's another possibility. I think you get the sense that, you know, they store their minds with kind of witty things that they can then use, you know, when the occasion arises.
Right.
And in Henry's case, I do not believe that he ever sat down and read Henry VIII.
Yeah.
I mean, my real theory is, you know, he flips through this text, which is clearly a text of the whole play, but he's probably seen in elocution texts or in elegant extracts the same kinds of speeches that he's pulling out and reading, you know, because they were excerpted with little tags on, you know, for what the traits, you know, this is defining anxiety or submission or, you know, different things.
But that's when Fanny first starts to warm up to him, is when because he is a good reader, he's a good read aloud reader, right? He has a nice voice and his performance is good. And maybe even if the Crawfords are all just very surface level and kind of performative in everything they do, Fanny, because she appreciates good literature so much, she also appreciates someone who can read Shakespeare well. So that's kind of an interesting moment in the novel.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a point in his favor, but not a point finally in his favor, right? I mean, she's able to separate in her mind the kind of the skill of the performer and the skill of the reader from whether he seems to be a very good person. Although later on, as she starts to get to know him in Portsmouth, that's when I think she gets kind of closer to thinking about him seriously. But I mean, I think that reading aloud scene is a very sexual moment. I mean, you can see her attraction to him, and then as soon as she realizes it, you know, she looks down and starts to, you know, do her needlework as, you know, with as much intensity as she can.
Right.
But, and even Austen's language in that scene really picks up that kind of erotic charge to that reading.
It's evocative.
Because it is about, it's about the body in performance and the body doing the reading as much as anything else.
And so you mentioned that Fanny and Anne Elliot are very up-to-date readers. I didn't really think about this before, but do you talk about newspapers and things in your book as well? Or is it mostly just books that the characters are reading?
Yeah, I don't talk about newspapers. That's a whole
I'm sure that's a whole,
that'd be a
yeah.
whole other thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it'd be a really interesting project to work on. And there's nothing much that's specific about what newspapers they're reading and why. Hazel Jones wrote a very interesting essay in Persuasions On-Line a few years ago on the Navy
Yeah,
lists.
that's what I was thinking of. That and how at the end of the novel, you find out about Mrs. Rushton running away with Henry Crawford from a newspaper as well.
So yeah, I mean, newspapers definitely are part of the novel. It's just that I'm not sure how specific one could get.
So we could spend an entire episode just talking about the books mentioned in Northanger Abbey, because that one, right, is a parody of
Mm-hmm.
Gothic novels, and so many Gothic novels are mentioned. Catherine Morland's reading gets her into trouble. She reads sensational Gothic novels that make her imagination run wild, and yet we know that Austen herself loved those kinds of books. She's not denigrating that genre, really. She's playfully poking fun. So what do you think is going on there, Susan? There's a lot to unpack in that novel.
Yeah, there certainly is, and you're right that Austen loves the Gothic. I mean, she's reading the Gothic from one end of her life to the other,
Mm-hmm.
and her family's reading the Gothic. You know, we've got a letter where she talks about her father sitting in an inn reading The Midnight Bell, which is one of the novels on Isabella Thorpe's list.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, even at the around the time, maybe it's 1809 or 10, she herself is reading a novel called Margiana, or the Widrington Tower. You know, I mean, so she keeps going with this. I don't know if she's obsessed, but she certainly enjoys it. Yeah, I don't think the problem is the books themselves in Northanger Abbey, but Catherine's immaturity as a reader. You know, how she takes a genre that really is not about realism, but is about night is nightmare, really.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's about our anxieties. What are our social anxieties or our personal anxieties? Well, they're about fears about the family, fears about power, you know, the kind of parental tyranny, but also you know, political or governmental tyranny, fears about the kind of role that women have in this world, that where women are isolated and threatened sexually, but also threatened for whatever kind of money or possible power they have. You know, the ways in which women bodies can be taken over in marriage or not in marriage. So, you know, here we've got a genre that is really exploring these issues that, yeah, Austen is interested in. But the problem is that Catherine is such an immature reader that she's just trying to make a kind of direct map of the Gothic world on the real world, or the fictional real world of Northanger Abbey or Bath.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that's one part of the thing that Austen is suggesting, I think. But another part of it is that Catherine's not entirely wrong. So maybe General Tilney didn't lock up his wife and feed her on coarse food for the last 9 years, you know. But he's not a nice man, obviously.
He starved her emotionally.
Right. He's a tyrannical parent. She can see that, although she doesn't want to see it. she does. I mean, they talk about that toward the end more. He was not, obviously not a kind husband. I mean, even Henry tries to describe him, when he's dressing down Catherine for her wild imagination, but he can't say anything really positive about his father's love for his mother. He says, "Oh, I'm convinced he loved her as well as he was able to," or something like that. And then he says, "I will not pretend to say that while she lived, she might not often have had much to bear." I mean, all those one syllable words, that was just
Understatement.
a tortured defense. He can't say anything very positive and very direct. Shakespeare does that same kind of writing. He'll put all these one syllable words in a line of blank verse, and it really slows things down. And that there's difficulty of some sort. Well, Jane Austen is a very good writer herself. And she knows how to
Right.
do those things in the same kind of way that Shakespeare does. So I think what Austen is really suggesting is that the Gothic does have a lot to teach us, and these characters actually are not, they're big readers of the Gothic. Henry says he's read hundreds, and yet he doesn't seem to recognize either what's going on. He's made a separation between his life and the life of the Gothic. And I think one of the things he's got to learn in the course of the novel is that there's not that much of separation.
Northanger Abbey has one of my favorite scenes, and it's a rare instance where Austen just fully inserts herself into the novel, and she gives her sort of soapbox speech about how novels are one of the greatest art forms, and they have so much to teach us, and they're so valuable, and people, it was fashionable at the time, or it was common to denigrate novels or to treat them like they were lesser, or they're silly, or they're chicklit. I'm sure did you talk about that scene or that sort of essay from Jane Austen in your book?
Yes, I did. I think it's great because here she is doing a defense of this genre right after, or right at the same time, she's been sort of making fun of Isabella and Catherine for being silly readers. And yet, or maybe it's right before, but anyway, I mean, she's giving us that as a kind of marker to say, here's what I believe. But also, I mean, there are some interesting little jokes in that. So she mentions in there, Cecilia or Camilla or Belinda. Well, Camilla is, the novel that John Thorpe has started to read and says, "Oh, it's nothing but an old man playing seesaw," or something like that. And that's about in the first, I don't know, 30 pages or so, let's say. I mean, it's really at the beginning, so it makes you wonder if he's ever, gotten through it. Catherine hasn't read Camilla, which is interesting. I mean, she recognizes it from his description, but she hasn't read that novel. So, I mean, I don't quite know what to do with that, but it's interesting that we're not looking at her as a model of a reader. One of the funniest parts is the mention of Belinda. Now, when I first started looking at that, Belinda is a novel that comes out in the 1800s. And I just thought, okay, well, that must be a way for Austen just to kind of make the reading list or the references of this novel that she's written, back between the 1790s and the early 1800s, more current for, a later publication. So I just thought, okay, well, that's an easy way of giving it a little bit of a facelift. But then I went and I looked at, I started reading Belinda, and the first thing in there is this little advertisement from Edgeworth where she says, I'm giving you this as a moral tale, not as a novel, because novels have so much folly, so much error and vice. And I thought, oh my goodness. So here is Austen having this rant about the novel. And in the middle of that rant, she inserts a novelist she admires who has said, don't think of this as a novel. So she puts Edgeworth right back in that genre, saying, we are an injured body and we have to have loyalty to this corporation, which she says something like later in that speech. This was really interesting to me because I was always making little discoveries like this that I don't know what they add up to all the time, but they certainly give you a kind of insight into Austen's playful mind.
Yeah, there's the delight of finding the Easter egg, but then you're also getting layer upon layer of meaning. And that's what I was going to ask you is like,
Yeah.
are there any references or jokes or other things that make sense to you now that you have read a lot of these books?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of little jokes, all the way through. The interesting thing about Austen, I think, is you can read Austen forever without knowing any of this. But once you do, it just adds these extra layers of complexity, but also extra layers of pleasure. For instance, and I don't talk about this in the book, but I do have a persuasions essay about it sometime in the past. In Sense and Sensibility, Mrs. Dashwood mentions a novel called Columella or The Distressed Anchoret by Richard Graves, who also wrote The Spiritual Quixote. And that came out in 1779. So when Jane Austen was 4 years old. And it's a small but very significant reference in Sense and Sensibility. It has a lot to do with that novel. This novel only went through one edition. It came out in 1779. So, I mean, even by the 1790s, when Jane Austen is putting together Eleanor and Marianne, or 1811, when Sense and Sensibility gets published, there can't be that many people who are readers of that novel who remember that novel very clearly. They might get the reference, but on a fairly basic level. But then in Persuasion, she picks it up again without mentioning it. There's a section in Columella where one of the characters objects to the fact that these people are riding around with other people's coats of arms on their carriages, and what's happened to the country. We have all these tailors and then other things, kind of taking on the names of our great families. And one of the things that is mentioned in a footnote is Wentworth, a barber of Oxford. And that picks up, Sir Walter's whole saying about how our great families, their names have become so common. He's thinking about Wentworth in this case. There's another point where Mr. Elliot comes by, and has something over his carriage, so you can't really see the arms on it, and so Mary can't recognize him. I mean, so here she is making a joke about this novel in 16, 17, that probably 10 people in England remember, and they might all be in her family, So I think a lot of it is just her own kind of internal playfulness that we're seeing here. I mean, they're not gratuitous, because when you start to look at them, they actually do make sense in the fabric of the fiction. But she can't really be thinking that there are many people who would be, remembering that novel very well at this stage.
Yeah. That brings me to what I want to talk about next, which is about Austen's own reading, because of course that hugely influenced her writing. We know that she unapologetically loved novels, but she also really read widely across genres. Can you talk a bit about that, about what else she was reading?
Yeah. So for the AGM, I'm going to be talking about Austen's reading, and I just thought that was kind of an impossible goal. How do you focus that, because she's reading everything.
Mm-hmm.
And so I decided to look at a particular period from, as they're getting ready to move to Chawton. From that point, January 1809, up to the point that Mansfield Parks had published in March 1814. And I decided to just go through the letters, not look at what's going on in the novels, but just go through the letters for now and see either what she says she's reading or what she quotes, just to get a sense of what, from the fragmentary evidence we had, what was banging around in her head. And I came up. So this is not real helpful in terms of getting me to narrow things, but I came up with at least 51 texts, and so maybe 12 of them are novels. About 9 are poetry. 9 are in the kind of politics, history, biography, category. She's got travels and memoir, maybe 4 of those. Lots of drama and opera, 14 different things. And then some stuff that has to do with religion or piety.
Mm-hmm.
There's a print of a circulating library. I think at Margate. Well, no, it's not the Margate one. Anyway, I can't remember where it is, but that I'm using in the book. And you can see in the print, if you look closely, that there are labels on the shelves for these different kinds of categories. And I mean, that really, I think, is interesting, because it gives me the sense that, as she's borrowing books from reading societies or circulating libraries, she's not sticking to one genre or another.
Mm-hmm.
She's really reading around.
Yeah. And that's what I love about reading the Juvenilia. One of the things that I love is that you see how much what a voracious little teenage reader she was. She wrote her an entire history of England, and I mean, it's very silly and truncated. But she's clearly read a lot of history to be able to condense it down and write her own history of England. So it's just really fun to see that she was such a voracious reader and writer from the very beginning.
Right. And that's really fun too, because, she's writing back to those historians. Like, here I am. I'm going to tell the story now.
Uh-huh.
You've had your chance.
Yeah, and I mean, she's this 15-year-old girl, which first is a demographic that nobody takes seriously, but at the time, particularly when women, aren't really considered historians, she felt confident enough to be like, you know what? I'm gonna take on all these dead guys, and I'm gonna tell my own version. I just love the cheek of that.
Yeah.
So, Susan, if you had to pick just one, is there a contemporary book, contemporary with Austen, that you would recommend to Austen lovers? One that would most enhance our understanding of her life and her novels? That's probably really hard because, like you said, there are so many. But is there one or two that stand out?
Well, I think a conduct book would be a slog, but an interesting slog. I mean, I think reading Fordyce teaches you a lot at Fordyce's sermons to young women, as well, or reading Hester Chapone's Letters on the Improvement of the Mind. She's a little friendlier to women, but I mean, you do get a sense of how how women are being schooled. And so what kind of world Austen is coming out of. So that would be one way I would answer. As you probably can tell, I don't like choose one questions, because I then start.
Sure.
I can't choose one. But another one would be Cooper's The Task. he's writing in blank verse, but it's really accessible. And his neighbor has just said, when he hasn't known what to write a poem about a sofa. So he starts, and the sofa takes him out, into a walk, and then he writes about the landscape, and he writes about the world. And I mean, Austen's reading Cooper her whole life, and Cooper's probably in every novel. Maybe not Northanger Abbey, but I think everything else. It's just really, it's fascinating. The other thing, since we were talking about novels and how long some of these guys are, like Richardson's, Sir Charles Grandison, or Burney's novels are huge and sometimes frustrating. There's a very short novel that Robert Martin reads that I would recommend, The Vicar of Wakefield, Goldsmith's novel.
Yes, I have that on my shelf. It is thin.
Yeah, it's thin and it's fun and it's interesting, especially if we think about it in terms of Robert Martin.
I like that you mentioned Cooper, because I just want to give a PSA out there. This is a common problem for voracious readers, is that you read words but that you have never heard pronounced. It took me a long time to realize that Cooper and Cowper were the same person, because Cooper is spelled Cowper. So if there's anybody out there this whole time have thought that those are two different poets, they're the same poet. It's just pronounced Cooper for some reason. My husband says you always know a reader because they mispronounce big words. My 9-year-old reads a lot and is always mispronouncing words.
Yeah.
Susan, this has been a really fun talk. I love talking about books. Thank you for coming on the show today. Where can our listeners go to learn about your book that's coming out and your other work?
Well, thank you. Jane Austen Books has it up on their website. It's going to be published on July 11th.
Okay.
It's being published by Bloomsbury, so it's on their website as well. It's also on Amazon and I think on Barnes and Noble. One place that you can go besides those places if you're interested in other things, is Persuasions or Persuasions Online.
Right.
We have zillions of essays, many of them dealing with Jane Austen and the books that she is thinking about, as well as other aspects of her life and works. So there's my PSA.
And Susan has been lovingly curating and compiling those essays for JASNA, and it's been a labor of love for her for a long time. Thanks so much, Susan. This has been really fun.
Well, thank you, Brecken. I really enjoyed it too.
Okay, friends, it's time for a stack of JASNA news. If you've ever dreamed of being immersed in a multi-day party with your best J-Nite friends, put this year's annual general meeting on your calendar. Every year, a different city hosts a JASNA AGM where Austen fans come together from all over the world to learn, to be entertained, and to enjoy the fellowship of like-minded readers. This year, the conference will be held in Cleveland and will be hosted by the Ohio North Coast region. Since registration is right around the corner, we've invited the co-coordinators to give us a sneak peek at what's in store for attendees.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Weinbrecht, co-coordinator of the 2024 AGM. Join us at the Hilton Cleveland downtown, October 18th through 20th, where fascinating speakers will discuss topics related to our theme, Austen Annotated, Jane Austen's literary, political, and cultural origins. We want to learn what Jane saw in the world around her and how it shaped her as she created her groundbreaking fiction. In addition, there are exciting workshops and sessions Thursday before the AGM begins, and activities Friday and Saturday evening, where we can learn to dance like Jane Austen, make our own book or Regency headgear, hear from men of the period about their occupations, enjoy a fashion talk and fashion show, attend a banquet and Regency ball with live music, and much more.
I'm Amy Patterson, the other half of this year's planning team. The AGM in Cleveland also gives you the chance to experience a vibrant city bustling with world-class experiences. A few activities to choose from include a visit to the world-famous Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, the Cleveland Museum of Art, a Shakespeare play put on by Cleveland's resident classical troupe, a Bach concert performed by a Grammy-winning Baroque orchestra, and several walking tours around our Gilded Age gem of a city. Day tours include a visit to Amish country or the Pro Football Hall of Fame, and a trip to President Garfield's house. On Sunday night, kick back and enjoy a moonlit dinner cruise along the scenic lakefront.
Visit jasna.org/Cleveland2024 to find information on registration and program details.
We should also mention that you have to be a JASNA member to register for the AGM. If you're not already a member, you can join online before you register. Use the new membership form on JASNA's website at jasna.org/join, and make sure to sign up for JASNA emails and AGM updates so you'll receive the latest information about the conference. Registration opens June 19th, and you'll want to be prepared with all of the information, so don't delay.
Now it's time for In Her Own Words, a segment where listeners share a favorite Austen quote or two.
Hi, Austen Chat. My name is Peggy Keegan, and I'm from the Maryland region of JASNA. My quote today is from Persuasion, and it reads as follows. My idea of a good company is the company of clever, well-informed people who have a great deal of conversation. That is what I call good company. You are mistaken, said he gently. That is not good company. That is the best. In this intense digital era of ours, this quote is a timeless life lesson about meaningful conversations, no matter one's age or circumstances. Thank you, Jane Austen.
Hello, dear listeners. I just wanted to ask you a favor. If you've enjoyed listening to Austen Chat, please give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and leave a comment saying what you like about the show. The more positive reviews we get, the more people will see and hear about the podcast, and the more Austen fans will find to join our community. Though Emma Woodhouse may have disagreed, I side with Mr. Weston. One cannot have too large a party, or too many Janeites. Also, just a reminder to follow JASNA on Facebook and Instagram for updates about the podcast, or to send us a line at our email address, podcast@jasna.org, if you have any comments, questions, or suggestions.